With this week's horrific news out of Charleston, we have to revisit, as we must constantly, the issue of white racism in the United States. It is endemic in our society. It leads to tragedy after tragedy, and it is not widely understood by the community in which it resides, which is to say, the white community of the United States. So here to help us talk about that and talk through that a little bit now is Robin DiAngelo. Robin DiAngelo is a PhD and an expert in the issue of white racism in particular. She's Director of Equity for Senior Services, Seattle-King County, and she writes for the Good Men Project. She is with us now. Dr. DiAngelo, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're so welcome.
So this has been a tragic week, and we've all been through a lot. You study racism, and I guess I would start with this. How does the white community and of this nation talk about an incident like this, and perhaps, at least with the tragedy that it represents, learn something from it?
Well, I think we need to be thoughtful about the way we respond and to notice what does it take for us to pay attention, to see it, right? So that sometimes even in our expression of grief or reaching out to comfort friends of color, what we're doing is reminding them that for us this is a perhaps shocking incident or moment. And for them it's one of many kind of relentless moments that they experience. And so inadvertently we remind them that it's not something we have to see unless it's really, really loud and explicit.
You know, we have, and I guess what I'm struggling with, and I don't usually struggle for words, but what I'm struggling with this issue, and I'm hoping you can help us with it, is to me, this is the other thing I think we miss is that we think that these incidents are random somehow, that they're like neutrinos striking the planet or something. They're just, we didn't have anything to do with it. Society didn't have anything to do with it. This guy was crazy and evil and mean, or whatever words you want to, labels you want to place on him. But I think there is a connection we fail to make between the national discourse as a whole, the discourse and the perceptions of many white people in this country. And I think we recoil from that. I think we say, well, no, I had nothing. You're implying somehow I had something to do with this horrific crime. You're condemning my heart. So isn't there a connection we're failing to make?
Oh, absolutely. And it manifests in a couple of ways. I mean, one is I anticipated that you might ask me how I saw white fragility playing out with this shooter, and what I was planning to say to you is that I try not to connect. I want to push the average well-intended white person out of denial, because that denial, at the same time that we're invested in white supremacy and this system, allows those extreme cases to take place. And if I try to connect the average person to this very explicit racist person, right, they're not going to identify or relate, and they're going to use it to reinforce this idea that racism is an aberration, that only some people are racist and they're, evil and bad people, and it's going to actually dig them in further. So you have to help people understand. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. I just wanted to jump in there, and I want, first of all, to explain to our audience your concept of white fragility, which if you could just take a second and fill us in on that, that would be great.
I'm someone who, for a living, leads primarily white audiences in discussions of race. So that is exceptional experience, but it has allowed me to see some incredibly patterned responses. It's almost like there's a script that we're reading from. It's so predictable and so patterned. And it just, we talk a lot about white privilege, but what I was and of course that's at play, but what I was seeing is this absolute inability to sustain or tolerate any challenge to our worldviews. And I think it triggers like the cognitive dissonance of being both taught to be oblivious, but part of that, how we maintain that obliviousness, is this refusal to know, right? It's an actively negotiated obliviousness. At the same time, we know perfectly well that it's better to be white, that we see ourselves as superior, but we could never admit to that. And that just makes us pieces of work. It makes us fall apart and respond really poorly and do everything we can to get things back into order, which is to maintain those investments without ever acknowledging that we have them. Right? And so when you challenge that, you're also challenging really precious ideologies that prop up white supremacy, individualism, you can't know anything about me, I'm unique, meritocracy, I worked hard for what I have, manifest destiny, I really have the right to be here above all others. So there's a lot going on, and it also makes us unable to sustain that discomfort. We're also feel entitled to be comfortable around race because we are most of the time comfortable. So when we're uncomfortable, then we kind of lash out to punish that person or thing that caused that discomfort and get us back on our footing, kind of our racial equilibrium, which is being in control, and kind of just shutting it out.
So, and we're talking with Dr. Robin DiAngelo about the concept of white fragility. So, in a sense, fragility is it translates to, among other things, fear. The notion that I am negotiating as a white person in this society, as the average white person in this society, I am negotiating through a kind of maze of uncertainties and beliefs and defense mechanisms, and maybe on some level I see that equal rights for others as a threat to my way of life, but I don't want to admit that because I've been programmed to believe that that's a bad or racist point of view. So I code it differently in my own brain. But when someone comes along to confront me about it, I feel violated in some way or threatened.
Yeah, and not only that I'm afraid I might lose what I have, but that I deserve what I have and you do not deserve what I have, right? Because it's also a very deep contempt, particularly for black life. I think black people are the ultimate racial other for whites, and you don't have to scratch very hard, even on the most progressive liberal white person who would never identify with this shooter. You don't have to. You just barely scratch the surface, and some pretty mean-spirited, angry resentment erupts.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that that struck me about this case in particular is that, but in general, the acceptable ranges of white discourse. For example, I remember back in 2008 in the Democratic primaries when Geraldine Ferraro said that Obama wasn't waiting his turn. Now, do you remember that?
Yeah.
Because to me, there was a lot of debate among white liberals. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can't hear you. Are you there?
I am here. Pete, can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear me now, Robin?
Oh, yes, and now I can hear you.
Okay. I remember in 2000... We'll just edit it together. It's okay. We'll figure it out. So there was a lot of debate at that point among white liberal Democrats about whether that was really a racist comment. There was actually serious pushback on that. But to me, I felt I grew up in the same socioeconomic stratum as Geraldine Ferraro. I grew up among ethnic, working class white people in Utica, New York, and in the Rust Belt, and I saw it clear as day to me, that was, they don't want to wait their turn. They want your uncle's job at the factory, but they didn't apprentice the way he did, and they don't want to wait in line. And they want, in other words, that redressing the economic injustices of 200 years was somehow really just what's impudence and impatience and presumption. And my perception was very different than that of a lot of other people's. Is a comment like that? Look, rest her soul. Geraldine Ferraro is no longer with us, but is a comment like that reflective of some of the things you're talking about?
Oh, I think so. I mean, there's a hierarchy, right? There's a hierarchy, and we know where we are. And, white women are next in line. So that's definitely happening. Yeah, when you think about affirmative action, and the group that benefited the most from affirmative action was white women, and that has a lot to do with their relationship to white men, right?
Yeah, sure, of course, and comfort levels. Does this also have to do with social interactions and comfort levels? In other words, do white decision makers, let's say male white decision makers, when we're talking about affirmative action, are they more comfortable promoting white women as part of the affirmative action process than, let's say, African American males because they're socially more comfortable with white women? Is that part of this phenomenon?
Well, and I don't want to minimize, sexism and patriarchy, but there's a kind of humanity that is recognized because white women are their wives, their daughters, their sisters, right? And so there is that humanity. There's also, it benefits me if my wife gets a job there or my daughter gets a job there, right? That kind of alliance also. I mean, ultimately it benefits me.
So, and then just taking this one step further, and I don't mean to lead you down a road where you don't want to go. So, but
Okay.
We're talking with Robin DiAngelo, but we have this killer in Charleston who said, according to the reports that we've heard from the tragedy, that you're taking our women and by implication, I think, if not directly, taking our jobs and usurping us, and you've got to go. We've got to get rid of you. Isn't there some sort of through line there that we should explore and examine as a society? Not to blame individual, moderate white Democrats or whoever we're talking about at any given time, but just to say that we as a society need to reflect on this and go deeper about it?
Oh, well, absolutely. I'm thinking, and whether this is connected to what you're asking me, that you've seen the lynching postcards?
I don't think I have, no.
Oh, there are famous postcards that were actually taken of lynchings and
oh, sure.
Sent around, and there's a famous picture of these people, they're picnicking while somebody's hanging, a black man is hanging, and there's a kind of glee, there's a kind of joy in the suffering that is unlike anything else, right? If we really thought, well, you misbehaved and you need to be put in your place, we don't have we might see it as our duty to correct, but we don't get this pleasure from the suffering. It's such a deep-seated resentment. And that's what keeps coming up for me. It's like, how do we keep that resentment in circulation? I saw a comment on Facebook like, where does this person get these ideas? And I was like, are you kidding? I mean, how can you not see it? It's circulating 24/7. It's less explicit in some ways and less socially acceptable, but it's all the more powerful in that it's harder to identify.
So what do we do, Robin DiAngelo, to advance the conversation in this area? What do we do? Obviously, you work with people one-on-one. You give talks about this, so you have the opportunity to be in a room with people. I work behind a microphone, I write on a computer, but I'm not in the room with people, not to mention when I look in the mirror, for that matter. But so how do we, in these less corporal, less immediate media that we operate in, what do we do to advance this conversation going forward in the white community that is, after all, responsible for all of this? And by the way, parenthetically,
I know.
we hear a lot of people complaining that wrongly that Muslim leaders don't condemn terrorism. Many thousands of Muslim leaders have condemned terrorism. We don't hear the same people saying the white community isn't condemning these white acts. So what do we do as a what do we do as a white community going forward to push our to advance our understanding a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of different thoughts that come up. But one is this dynamic. You may have heard of it. I think it's called like or it's been referred to as the backfire effect. Like if you show soldiers anti-war movies, it ends up actually amplifying their desire for war.
Right. Right.
Do you know what I'm talking about? So it's like when there's cognitive dissonance between two things, right? It's bad to be racist. I am superior. Right. But you have an emotional investment in one of those. Then when you show counter evidence, it actually reinscribes the part you have the deepest emotional investment in. And so you watch people watching these incidences, white people seeing with their own eyes these incidences, and actually digging in deeper to deny that it's happening. So I'm not going to be able to give you a simple answer. I mean, they're often the kinds of things we need to do are not tangible, right? Like humility. Right. In the field that I'm in, there's different approaches to kind of what white folks might need to do, and a lot of models talk about loss. We have to acknowledge the loss that we have. The loss of our cultural identities, etc. That actually doesn't resonate for me in any way. For me, what I think we have to do is get really honest about our internalized superiority, that it feels good, that we're invested in it, and look at ourselves in the mirror and face that, and then hopefully say that is not acceptable, and I have to challenge it 24/7. So I have to be willing to bear witness to the pain of racism and the pain that I've caused, to be willing to put myself in environments where my racial worldview will be challenged, to listen. I'm always taken aback about the certitude with which the average white person who doesn't have people of color in their lives, who hasn't thought deeply in any way, just rushes in to claim what the reality is for other people.
Right.
And so that, of course, I mean, there's no easy answer for that, but you can't resist it if you can't see it.
Right, and I guess a last point I would make is I know that one of those points of resistance you'll see is that people will hear something like that and say, "Well, I didn't cause it. I was just living my life." So I guess to a certain extent, and I'll conclude with this, let you have the last word, but I guess I would say, and you may not be comfortable with this word, but in a sense it's a spiritual exercise.
The word doesn't resonate for me, but certainly one of consciousness and identity. You have to fundamentally, like to the core, kind of break down how you see yourself. And I think the most powerful adaptation of racism over time, and it's a brilliant system that is highly adaptive, to challenges. But the most effective is this idea that to be a good person and to be racist is, mutually exclusive. Right, it's not possible to be a good person and be racist, and that's another piece that causes white fragility. It causes white people to lose their minds. You've got to understand it as an unavoidable system, and that you actually enthusiastically want to identify your racism, so you can stop it. Stop engaging in it. And another piece of that is just to be honest that we are invested in it. I mean, I really think we need to have, for lack of a better way to say it, a heart-to-heart with ourselves. Do I really want this to end? it serves me, and you have to get to where that is not acceptable to you. It might serve you, but at the cost of someone else, and you can't sleep at night knowing that. And so you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to, it's going to get messy, but you are going to try.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but I'm sorry that it took a tragedy to get us to talk, but I have learned a lot from it, and I hope you'll come back and speak with us again.
Oh, I would be honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Dr. Robin DiAngelo about white racism and the concept of white fragility. We will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.